Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi. To a video talking about the new banners we got. I don't think this banner is very good. Nilou is a character that, by her kit's design, is incredibly restricted in terms of what teams you can use with her. And because of her restrictions, there's only specific units that work well with her, and a lot of those units are 5 stars. If you want to make your Nilou's teams function, you can do it with basically whatever. But if you want to make your Nilou teams good, you really want to have Nahida. You want to have Kokomi. And the sad part about that is just that, well, a lot of people just don't. If you do have Kokomi, if you do have enough Primo Gems to go for Nahida, there's like 3 situations you can be in. Situation number 1, you've been playing for a long time, you have Kokomi, you have enough Primos to guarantee Nilou and Nahida. If you're in that situation, you probably already have pretty high constellation on Xiangling and Albedo and Barbara. So the 4 stars are pretty underwhelming. If you are a relatively new player who doesn't have a lot of Primo Gems saved up, doesn't have Kokomi, then it's going to be hard to make Nilou very good. And the third situation is if you are like a relatively new-ish player, but you do have enough Primos to guarantee Nilou and everything that works well with her. And that's good. That's a situation where a banner like this would actually be quite good for you. You also end up getting a little bit because since you basically have to commit to get other specific units, if you only have enough Primo Gems for those units, and then another unit comes out and it's a unit that you think looks cool, or you really want, or looks good, or whatever, then you're gonna have to decide, okay, well, do I actually go for Nahida? Do I actually go for Kokomi? Or do I go for this unit that I like? And that's gonna put you in a really shitty situation. Because Nahida's not out yet, and she's likely going to be part of Nilou's best teams, and because of the things I've mentioned, I really do believe that if you want to go for Nilou, it's better to wait for a rerun. Units get rerun. We'll get her rerun eventually. And unless you just really like her animations, you really like, which is fine, right? If that's the case, you can go for her. Never think that I'm telling you that you can't go for a unit because you like them. If you like them, go for them. But if you're going for her because you think the gameplay's cool and you just think she's gonna be good, I really do think it's better to wait until her rerun. That being said, Xiangling and Albedo is still better than I don't know, playing Sayu constellations. The people that want to get them are more likely to be people that already have them, but also it's still Xiangling and Albedo, right? It's still actual good units that actually have good constellations. So it's not like the worst banner we've ever had. I mean, a lot of similar things can be said with Albedo. By the time this comes out, I'll have an Ask the Jeff Albedo out where I talk about his full value, so you can go watch that. Now let's move on to the weapon banner. God, the fuck is this, man? This is an interesting weapon banner, as usual. Zajef and the word interesting. Name a more iconic duo. Sagbo is pretty bad. It's not really good on anyone. There's characters that it's usable on, namely Diona, kinda Goro, meh. It's okay on Yelan, it's okay on Kole, it's fine on Sarah. One thing that you'll notice is that it's basically always better to have Fav. I'd say the only situation where it's better to have Sak is in very niche situations where you are using Diona and you really need that cryo energy. Generally, Fav will be better because it generates energy for your whole party and less field time because you don't have to hold your E twice on Diona. Having the option to go for Sak when you're playing things like Ela teams, when you're playing an Ayaka team where you just really want to get a lot of energy so you don't have to worry about batterying too much, but generally Fav will basically always be better, and because Fav is literally a free-to-play weapon, you get it from playing the story. Dragon's Bane. Dragon's Bane is a decent weapon that has one massive issue, which is that it's a pole arm, and there's just so many good pole arms. That being said, because of Raiden, Hyperbloom Raiden specifically, being a team that's gaining some popularity that I personally like quite a bit, Dragon's Bane is her best weapon. It's not the only option you can go for. The Moon Piercer, where you still have some EM, but you also have an attack buff that you can pick up on another member of your team, is also pretty decent. Raiden's Bane is a bit better. That being said, the refines don't do anything for it because they don't increase the reaction damage that Raiden's gonna do. Just keep that in mind. The only characters that actually care about refines on it are like Xiangling, who would rather use catch. I guess Rosaria, who would rather use catch if you're playing her in a melt team. Hu Tao doesn't have a better free-to-play option. Her weapon options that are better are either locked behind Battle Pass with Deathmatch, or they're 5-star weapons. So that's kind of the only character that actually like actively kind of wants a Dragon's Bane. If you look at like the new comps with Dendro, the only one that really wants Dragon's Bane is the Raiden teams because she doesn't need energy because she doesn't use burst. If you look at stuff like Toma needs energy, and it's really, really difficult to get enough energy recharge to be able to use Dragon's Bane. Like, you're gonna need to have like over 30% energy recharge on an EM Goblet. An EM Goblet is already incredibly difficult to get to begin with. You need to have a lot of ER on it on top of that. It's very, very hard to be able to run Dragon's Bane, so most of the time when you play Toma, you'd rather actually run Cutane Cross Spear or Favonius Lance. Rainslasher, a little bit less bad because now it's an okay free-to-play option for Beto. Oh yeah, and also for Rainslasher, I'm talking about Aggravate Beto, not like Taser Beto. It's really bad on Taser Beto. It's always been a pretty decent weapon for Diluc. It's kind of it. Even on those characters, you'll generally have better options. It's just, I guess it's okay. Alright, so Sackbow, Dragon's Bane, and Rainslasher are not weapons I'm particularly happy to see on a banner. Then we got two new weapons. We got the Wandering Evenstar and the Xiphos Moonlight, both of which are pretty decent. The Wandering Evenstar, so it gives you Elemental Mastery as its substat, 42 type, so 510 base attack at level 90, 165 Elemental Mastery, and then following effect will trigger every 10 seconds. Basically, it's always active. The character will gain 24% of their EM as bonus attack, with nearby characters gaining 30% of the buff. If you play it on a character that is actually building full EM, because the Catalyst and because Nahida's coming out relatively soon, we can talk about Nahida. So you're at like 940. Now, if you play on-field Nahida with her burst, you can actually gain another like almost 250, probably around 250. If you're going Gilded Dreams, you can gain another 230, right? That's a lot of Elemental Mastery. The biggest problem with this is that Nahida's passive makes it so that once you reach over 1000 EM, your Elemental Mastery starts becoming a lot less valuable, because below 1000 EM, the more EM she has, she actually gains crit rate and damage percent based on how much EM she has, but it caps out at 1000. So any EM above 1000 is like basically useless. It's not that it's useless, but it's less useful. But even if you were to like just build her full EM and just focus on that, that's what, 24% of that. It's a 340 attack buff with about 100 attack buff to the rest of your team. About 100 attack is generally going to be, right, if we look at our base attack of my characters, right, he's at 751, so 100 would be 13%. Right, she's at 919, so it would be about 11%. It's generally hovering between 10 and 15% attack percent. Right, so 100 flat attack is the equivalent of like between half and 3/4 of a noblesse buff, which is decent. Nothing crazy, but is, considering that all you need to do for it is to use the weapon, and because the weapon with the EM bonus gives you a lot, it's decent. If you start getting higher refinements on it, right, it goes to up to 48 at refinement 5, which is gonna double this, right? And that's actually a pretty decent buff. Now, the biggest problem with this is that it's not always going to be worth it actually going for this amount of EM. The amount of stuff you gain from having a higher buff will be lower than the amount of stuff you lose, or it'll be lower than the amount of stuff you lose by just overstacking EM too much. So more realistically, you're probably just going EM Dendro crit in a team like this, which means that the buff is 150 at R5 and around 75 at R1. The biggest issue that Wandering Evenstar has is basically that these are decent buffs, but this is when you have 1000 EM, and there are not a lot of characters that will actually get to 1000 EM. It's very, very difficult to actually make it so that you get that much EM on a lot of the Catalyst users. When you look at someone like Hazo, you can actually get a pretty high amount of EM, so it's pretty decent on him. But part of what makes it good, right, is the attack buff that you give to your own character, the one that's wearing it. And if your character doesn't have a lot of damage percent and a lot of crit rate, crit damage because you're building full EM on them in order to get the higher attack buff, then that higher attack buff doesn't get multiplied by as much when it comes to your damage percent and your crit. So it actually isn't as valuable as it looks like when you just calc, okay, well, how much EM can I get to? As like the very, very like conclusion for this is, I would consider Wandering Evenstar to be very similar to what Ali Hunter was when Fischl was, or when it was initially released for Fischl, where it is a good option that can actually be the best 4-star option that you have, but it's also not really by much. There's a lot of situations where it isn't actually the best option. We actually have so many Catalyst users that are just not that good at like being built for damage, and so most of the time you'll use the supportive catalyst options, but the actual catalyst options we have are really good, right? You have the Widsith, that is a relatively like somewhat situational weapon that's really good at front loading your damage, right? Because it gives you a massive buff but for a short duration with a long cooldown. Sacrificial Fragments, when it comes to EM weapons, when it comes to the characters that care about EM, you got Sucrose basically and Hazo. Hazo doesn't like Sac Frag that much because the additional E is nice, but if you build him full EM, the damage on his E isn't all like that insane. It's still good though, but Sucrose is really where Sac Frag is really, really good because her AoE is really large, so it's really easy to proc it even if you don't have high refine. And then on top of that, it's just, having the additional grouping from the Sacrificial Fragments is incredibly useful. The additional energy generation, it helps you make your setups easier. When we go back to the more damage focused units, we got Solar Pearl as a very solid option. For units that need energy, Sword Eye is pretty decent. You've got Mappa Mare for characters that like EM but are still damage focused. That's actually a pretty solid weapon. And then on top of that, you have so many good support options. You have the Thrilling Tales, you have Hakushin. Wandering Evenstar is very much a weapon that does both. It's both a support option and a damage focused option, and it's only going to be really good on characters that want to build actual really high EM, right? The characters that would want to have the EM and the attack like together the most are generally characters like Yanfei or Klee, who can actually vape because your EM and your attack can be multiplicative together. But on those characters, you don't want to build too much EM because the EM scaling for vape, like it falls off relatively early. So you don't want to get too much EM, you want to get a lot of crit, a lot of damage percent, which means that the amount of attack you get from the passive isn't as high. But yeah, so like I said earlier, it's very similar to Ali Hunter in the sense that there will definitely be situations where it's the best 4-star option you have, but I would argue that it's niche enough that not that it's niche enough, but that it's not common enough to justify really wanting it. If you do end up wishing on the weapon banner, definitely better to get than 7th Dragon's Bane or an 8th Sacrificial Bow. And then finally we have Xiphos Moonlight. Basically the exact same thing, same stat line, Elemental Mastery, but with two main changes. A, it's a sword instead of a catalyst, which means that the characters that it affects are different. And B, it gives you energy recharge instead of attack. Xiphos Moonlight is a very solid weapon. It's probably the best limited 4-star, like weapon banner only 4-star we've gotten so far. The characters that would like to use this, right? You've got maybe Kuki in Hyper Bloom teams, you've got maybe Kazuha. Actually, Sunfire Jean does, so potentially Jean. You could use it on Revmelt Kea, but not really. You could use it on Titsing instead of Iron Sting, but Iron Sting will be better. I guess you could use it on Albedo, but like, bruh. Yeah, it's mostly these three. If you look at the amount of EM they will get to, if you build triple EM Kazuha, you'll get 187 times 3, plus the weapon, plus his ascension, plus, let's say, about 100 in substats. Okay, yeah, okay, 940-ish. Then Jean and Kuki, you're basically gonna have the same thing, but without the ascension. That being said, in Kuki's case, you can actually use the Gilded Dream set, so that's another 230. Alright, on these two, you kind of need to go VV, whereas on Kuki, you can get away with Gilded Dreams. So, at Refinement 1, this is going to be 0.036. It's about 33%, 34% energy recharge, 30 on Jean, almost 40 on Kuki. Oh yeah, I guess you could use it on DMC as well. On DMC, you're not going full EM. This is R1, this is R5. And as you can see, right, with high refines, you actually get a lot of energy recharge. The main, like, use for this is that in Kazuha's case, Iron Sting passive doesn't really give him anything, so you very often want to run him on a Favonius Sword. Now, the Favonius Sword has a very good passive and has an ER substat, but it is very, very possible that you end up in a situation where you have too much ER on your Kazuha. Now, when you compare it to Iron Sting, because with Iron Sting it's actually quite difficult to get enough, you will often find yourself in situations where you want to go energy recharge sense if you have to go Iron Sting. If that's ever the case, then Iron Sting is worse than Favonius, literally just for Kazuha's personal output. But then on top of that, the Favonius passive also helps the rest of your team. With this weapon, with the Xiphos Moonlight, you actually get a bunch of energy recharge on Kazuha with the passive, which helps you reach the energy requirements more easily. And you also, right, get a team buff, right? This is the R1 self, R1 team, which is 30%. of that. It's about 10% ER to the rest of your team, which is actually quite valuable. That being said, one thing that is good to remember is that Favonius weapons really are broken. So if we look at an energy calc, let's say you play Kazuha in a, let's do international. Okay, so total amount of energy, ER requirements, Child is 40, Bennett is 60, Kazuha is 60, Tangling is 80. So these are average ER amounts. Do keep in mind that like there's a lot of assumptions that can change how these numbers end up changing. And so this is without Fav. When you look at with Fav, and as you can see, the Favonius weapon has reduced ER requirements by 25 on Child, 30 on Bennett, 45 on Kazuha, 35 on Chanling. Now, in Kazuha's case, this one is kind of a lie because the Fav itself is giving you 60, which means that it's actually not this. It's like at the very least 160, more like 170. So you're actually more saving like 20-ish%. Anyways, point being, in a situation like this, in a team like this where you can actually potentially get 2 Fav procs, the amount of energy recharge that Fav gives to the rest of your team, right? It's not directly energy recharge because it's energy, but is the equivalent to something that can be upwards of 30 to 35 to maybe even 40%, depending on how many particles you're generating on your team. Like we just said, Xiphos Moonlight gives at R1 about 10%. Which means that when it comes to the energy generation for the rest of your team, Fav is still generating a pretty significant more energy. That being said, because the Xiphos actually gives self-energy that is higher than Fav, but basically, right, in Kazuha's case, right, his ER requirements go down by 34%. If he's on Xiphos, it's still at 157, which could be potentially difficult to get through substats, but it's a lot more realistic, obviously. But yeah, anyways, I'm going through all of this to basically just show that while Xiphos definitely can be a better option, it will not be a better option in every single situation. There will be situations where Fav is still better. And considering this is, in order to get it, you have to go on the weapon banner. This isn't a weapon that you get from losing from getting an off banner on standard or on a limited banner, right? You have to specifically wish for this weapon banner to get this weapon. The fact that it's not always better means that there's not that much value in going for it. If you do end up getting it, it is very much a strong weapon, and it is likely a weapon that you will want to be using. Specifically in characters that can't really afford, or in teams that can't really afford to swap into your Fav weapon more than once per rotation. If you only do get one per rotation, then they're actually mostly similar in terms of the energy generation, Fav being ever so slightly better for energy generation, but Xiphos substat in terms of like for Kazuha is a lot better. TLDR of all of this, Xiphos is a good weapon with the nerfs that they gave to it from the initial like beta version of it that we had leaked a very long time ago. It isn't just strictly better than Fav anymore, because if it was that, right, 52 instead, right, at R1 it's giving 50% to self plus 15% to the rest of your team, and that's kind of just a bit too good. But as is, I would say a slightly better option than Fav for Kazuha overall, but not better to the point that it's worth going for. And that leaves us with only the 5-star weapons. So let's take a look at the key of Khaj-Nisut. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, I'm sorry. It's a low base attack, high substat weapon with HP% substat, which is already kind of bad because it makes it a lot less versatile because not as many characters want HP%. HP increased by another 20%. When a skill hits opponents, you gain the Grand Hymn effect for 20 seconds. This effect increases the equipping character's elemental mastery by 0.12% of their max HP. This effect can trigger once every 0.3 seconds, max 3 stacks. When you gain 3 stacks, or when you refresh it, the EM of all party members will be increased by 0.2% of the equipping character's max HP. This is a weapon that when you hit enemies with elemental skills 3 or more times, you buff your team's EM by 0.2% of the wearer's HP. Let's calc how good that can actually be. So 71k HP with this weapon, which means that the EM buff is this, multiplied by 0.2%. Around 142 yen, which is more than an instructor, and it has 100% uptime. It's pretty good. It is going to be Nilou's best weapon. It's pretty straightforward. That's kind of all there is to it. She's not the only character that could use it though. Let's talk about it for Cookie. So in Cookie's case, it's 12 to 89 base HP. Now the HP% is going to actually be a lot very, very different because in teams where you actually want to play Cookie, you want to play Cookie Hyper Blue, and you want her to be full EM. Alright, so the amount of HP you actually have is going to be closer to 35k with this weapon, which gives about a 70 EM buff to the rest of your party. It also gives like the self buff, right, which is 0.12 times 3, so 0.36 self buff right, which is a 127. Now, that is actually less than our instinct. It's also less than Xiphos Moonlight. And generally, in teams where you play Kuki Hyperbloom, you don't really care about EM on the rest of your party. It is going to give you better healing because it's a lot of HP, and a lot of HP is going to obviously make your healing better. But in terms of damage options, it's actually not that good. It can be good if you end up playing your Kuki in aggravate teams, where the rest of your party actually does care about the elemental mastery. Because in aggravate teams, well, that 70 EM to the rest of your party actually kind of matters. That being said, it also does mean that her personal damage is going to be lower, so I'm not necessarily certain it's going to be actually worth doing. 0.2% is applied to the character too, is it? My mistake then. I take it back. I thought the 0.2% didn't apply to party member. I didn't read properly. So it is actually going to be slightly better than the other EM options. If you don't have any substats on HP percent, if you just have the bare minimum, it's a little bit worse, but not by much. Actually, no, it's not. Wait, I'm fucking dumb. This is still better. This is 165, it's not 187. Yeah, okay, it is still better. But yeah, so that's nice. All in all, this weapon is obviously quite good on Nilou because Nilou's kit scales really well with HP. Nilou's teams also scale really well with the rest of your party having elemental mastery, so the passive is really good. When it comes to non-Nilou characters, it's okay. It can be a decent option on characters like Kuki, but it's not going to be like way above the other options unless you start getting into 5-star weapon refines, which is, yeah. It also looks like shit. True. Good take. It's not, I don't know if it actually looks like shit, but it doesn't feel like it fits Nilou's color scheme at all. Right, there's also Lila that's coming soon. Lila can be built with a bunch of HP as well. Lila 11092. That's a pretty similar to Kuki. That being said, I don't expect Lila to be very good in reverse melt teams because the way that her energy works, as far as we understand so far, her skill, it gives her a shield, and while the shield is active, when you cast elemental skills, it will generate stars that will then home into enemies and deal damage. But her energy generation is not locked behind casting the shield initially. It's locked behind the stars going on the enemies. And if you ever lose your shield, the stars stop going on the enemies. So you lose your energy generation and you just don't get your burst back. And so I expect Lila to be a unit that is a fine defensive option in freeze teams because you have another form of defensive utility by freezing the enemies. But in reverse melt teams, I don't expect her to be all that good. So the self-buff EM doesn't matter that much, so it's mostly the team buff, but if you're playing her in freeze teams, the only unit that cares about the EM is going to be your animal unit. It's gonna be okay, it's not gonna be that insane. That being said, it does have obviously the HP substat, and Lila is an HP scaling character, which means that in terms of damage, it will actually be pretty decent. All in all, it's an okay sword. If you go for Nilou, it's her best option, but it's less valuable to her. I would expect it to be less valuable to her than getting Nahida and or Kokomi, so it's really not something I'd see myself recommending if you want to go Nilou. And if you want to go other characters, I don't think it's really worth going for. And then all that's left is the Jade Cutter. Jade Cutter's a good weapon. Very, very generalist because it has crit, so it can be used on basically anyone. It does have the downside, because it's crit rate and not crit damage, that if you have a way to give your characters a lot of crit rate, you can actually go over 100%, which is wasted stat. So when it comes to freeze teams where you use Blizzard Strayer, for example with Ayaka, when you go Jade Cutter, you'll very, very often find yourself overcapping. I think you actually overcap even with no additional substats. If you manage to have no crit rate substats and only attack percent and crit damage, it can actually be a pretty decent option. But if not, it's kind of to the point where sometimes it'll just be better to use the 4-star options, depending on how much crit you have, obviously. Other than that, it's a pretty solid option on most characters. It's a solid option on Ayato, solid option on Kutsing. If you play carry Bennett, I guess, it's a solid option on Singto, on Kea and Reverse Melt. It's a generalist weapon that isn't really anyone's signature, so if you want to go for Nilou, it's a nice weapon to lose your 50-50 too, I guess. And that'll be it. So, as usual, weapon banners are a fucking scam. They can give you stuff that you want, but do keep in mind that weapons do not change playstyle. There's two situations in which you might want to go for the weapon banner. Situation number one, you just really, really, really like a character and you think that the weapon looks cool on them or something, or you want to be able to say, oh, I got this character's signature weapon. But if you do that, do remember that it's going to make it harder to get other characters that you like in the future. And then the second situation is you do not care about getting more play styles. All you want is bigger numbers. I don't think that's a lot of players, but I do think that there are some players that just want bigger numbers because they find it fun to kill things faster. So if that's the case, then you might want to go for a weapon banner, but just do keep in mind that, yeah, it's a bit of a yikes. As I said in my last banner analysis video, never go for a weapon banner for a 4-star because you will not get it. The way that the odds work for stuff like that, you're guaranteed, basically guaranteed, that if you do 50 wishes, you'll get about 4-ish of these weapons. But you can't guarantee which ones, and there's no epitomized path for the 4-stars. There's no like way to like guarantee pity that, okay, well, I got Fav Lens and Machaira Aquamarine 3 times each. Now I'm guaranteed to get one of the other 3. No, there's no pity system like that. So you're guaranteed to get some of the 4-stars on banner. You are very far from guaranteed to getting the one you want. But yeah. Leave a like, leave a comment, all that shit, right? I don't know, it's the good old call to action. Do the thing I'm telling you to do. If I don't tell you to do the thing, you're probably not gonna do it because you're just vibing. But if it's not too much of an ask for you, leaving a like really does help. Leaving a comment, it can either be on anything I've said before, or you can just say a nice message, whatever. You know what? Actually, if you're gonna leave a nice message, leave a nice message for the editors, all right? They're doing an insanely good job, and I'm incredibly lucky to have them. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys around.